Hi, this is Bob Samuels, and I'm here today for a Candid with Bob with Bret Smith from HIP B2B. How are you today, Bret?
I'm doing fabulously well, Bob. How about yourself?
Very good. So Bret, we've known each other for, I looked at LinkedIn, we've known each other for, been LinkedIn for over 10 years. I think you share the most common connections with me as anybody out there. I think it's over 1,100 common connections.
Wow,
So
that's a metric by itself.
you get around. So we're in the same boat. So we have a question right off the bat. So so Michael, are you interested in? Do you have a question, or I'm going to let you talk? I'm allowing you to talk.
Oh, hi, Michael.
Hi there. I didn't have a question yet, but I might soon.
Oh, I see your hand up. Good. So nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Excellent.
Same here. Yeah, I mean, anybody that wants to jump in with a question, I'll be happy to field it at any point during our time together today.
Excellent. Very good. So I'm gonna get back to, so anyway, Bret, so nice to see you. It's a pleasure. I've known you all these years as an email marketer, and to your credit, you've expanded to to enhance and complement the email. So what are you doing these days as far as omni-channel marketing?
Yeah, so omni-channel marketing is probably not so much what we do, but certainly omni-channel demand gen. And I say that only, Bob, because the outcomes we get, I think, are more specific to demand gen. That said, the core idea is what we're executing upon, right? And that is simply, and that's how we covered off in the sort of our sneak preview trailer. The difference between a multi-channel campaign and an omni-channel campaign are at the end of the day outcomes. But essentially you're taking a multi-channel campaign and layering over that a strategy, a strict adherence to keep a messaging on point and consistent, though optimized across channels. And then, and this is really important, being able to unify those outcomes. And for us as demand generators, that means that those outcomes have to look like what a demand generator expects. And that, to your point about knowing me always as an email marketer, Bob, has been one of the great learnings of this past year for me. I'm really excited about what happens when you combine, at least for us, email with another channel in a strategic way and find out that the outcomes are not just dollar for dollar the same, but better, and oftentimes with intelligence that can literally lead you right to a specific contact that engaged with your content.
So it's not an additive thing. It's not like 1 + 1 = 2. It's 1 + 1 = more than 2, because
Absolutely.
programs help each one be more successful.
I like that, Bob. I might just coin that. I tried 1 + 1 = 3, but it didn't seem quite right.
So it's in there somewhere.
Yes.
But more than 2 is the point. And so, the display ads and social and so forth helps the email campaigns be more successful and vice versa.
It absolutely does. And Bob, if I could just say one thing at the outset, we anticipated people might ask us what's the difference between multi-channel and omni-channel. That's part of the reason we put that trailer out there. There's another reason that you would want to take a look at this. And I think that has to do with the fact that while omni, and I don't know about the Greek root, Latin root, wherever this came from, omni, at least for me, sort of implies everything. Well, who is everywhere? I mean, maybe Google. Certainly most of us can't be everywhere. But in understanding the difference between omni and multi, that's kind of where the rub meets. So you're not everywhere. It's basically 2 or more channels working in concert.
And the channels you're talking about, so it's all digital, right? So
yes, all digital that we've experimented with, yes.
And you're experimenting with social, meaning LinkedIn, Facebook. What are some other good social B2B channels?
Yeah, Facebook, not yet. Certainly, we have participated in various display networks, particularly those that enabled ABM type outcomes. And as we'll talk about, I think when we get into some of the use cases, one of the 4 use cases is actually based on an ABM audience that we promoted to on LinkedIn.
So when I hear social from you, I should translate that to LinkedIn for the most part.
I would say that's mostly true. Lord knows I wish we had another universe that is as enabling of B2B professionals as I feel like LinkedIn is. But presently, I don't think we're there, particularly in the B2B space.
Yeah, and by the way, I don't have experience firsthand, but my understanding is Facebook does really well for B2B, which I'm surprised about because I personally have my personal and my business personas separate. But,
well, but Bob, I would say something there just very briefly. I my personal opinion is that for SMB, Facebook's a great place to play. For enterprise, maybe for brand awareness, but demand gen outcomes, I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, LinkedIn seems to be made for it. I mean, especially, I didn't realize they allow ABM. So
yeah, you can actually, through their ad campaign manager, there are a variety of ways that you can leverage an audience. So yes, it can be an ABM list. It can be one described by various persona elements. You can also ingest a certain number of domains and tell it to find you a lookalike audience. Yeah. It's a little ways to go, but it's pretty outstanding insofar as it's basically a self-service setup with them.
beautiful. So you can target a specific company, specific levels and departments within the company.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yep. And we can share some of that. I think part of our promotion for this event was to share the blog version of our 4 use cases, so to speak. Yeah. I say so to speak because it drills into 2 of them, and the other 2 we're going to talk about later on as Q4 proceeds.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But yeah, so that's I think that's great. So I saw a couple of use cases, like you said, and they focus on non-IT audience, which you've shown success on. I think the jury's probably still out on the IT audience because I think the sample size may be small.
I think that would be a fair statement, Bob. We absolutely ran test campaigns to IT audiences for a variety of brands. Were they abysmal failures? Hell no. But were they the sort of thing that we write a use case around? Well, probably not. And I think it kind of boils down to, did we get lift? Yes. But was it worth the added effort? Probably not. We could have probably taken that same budget and gotten outcomes purely from an email endeavor.
Okay, well, good to know. So
we're continuing to tweak it, and you can get the outcomes. And at the end of the day, I'd be remiss in not saying this, we can't provide you that degree of intelligence about an email campaign. It just doesn't work that way. But we can absolutely tell you about what that audience looked like as they engaged or didn't engage with your content on an ad network or on social media, specifically LinkedIn.
So tell us how that looks, because that part is interesting to me. So the intelligence that you learn from the engagement or non-engagement of the display, it sounds pretty powerful.
Well, I believe that it is. I came from a life before all of this, before you knew me, Bob, where I was in the world of location intelligence, predictive analytics, things of that nature. We used that kind of information to do everything from determine the optimal store locations based upon anticipated demand. It was pretty intense stuff. So let's say I had a high bar to set for myself when I began to look at these outcomes. And as an email marketer, I had a healthy amount of skepticism. So what we did find was that there's a great deal of information that can be made available to us about this audience. The things you would expect, company firmographic type stuff, but also titles, levels, functions, industries, And the location segments go right down to a metro area or sometimes even smaller than that. So yeah, you can get your arms around a lot of information that I would argue is far more than anecdotal.
So some of the information you can get is, for instance, based on certain demographic slices, whether it's geography or level or industry or whatever, you can see, for instance, the percent of clicks per impression. So you can see that something as a general global thing, some audiences are more engaged than others.
Yeah, I would be speculating if I said, if I spouted a couple of ideas as to why I thought IT didn't perform as well. But, I think particularly as an email marketer, I know that we keep that IT audience, how shall I say, well informed. So it may just be that that sort of an engagement is not something they're looking for. Perhaps they're already hearing about it from other channels. Hard to say.
So you're saying they're potentially over inundated with marketing efforts to begin with, and maybe these other groups are fresher.
Yeah. I'd also, because I'm one of these kind of brick and mortar guys, right? How to sort of things, Bob. I'd kind of like to talk about the experiments themselves.
Good.
I'm no scientist, so I'll use air quotes on that. But the trials that we conducted for various brands and various audiences were very informative, and they took place over an expanded period of time. But there was a short learning curve that was so important because it helped us arrive at what was the optimal way that we could use LinkedIn.
So give us a couple examples. So I think you have the HR and one of the finance case studies available.
Absolutely.
And if anybody wants a copy, I'll be happy to send it to you, or Bret can send it to you.
Yeah, so as everybody knows, we do have a couple of more of these coming out. They will be in blog form. We're releasing the Finance One audience, which is an ABM audience, on next week, actually. And then the HR won't be available in blog form until December 14th, but it's available in PDF. So raise your hand if you'd like it. I don't mean at this particular time necessarily. But what I wanted to say was apart from drilling into the use cases themselves, it's important to know what the foundation was. In LinkedIn, particularly anyone here that's familiar with the campaign manager, there are literally 8 different types of outcomes that you can achieve through one of these campaigns. Now, drill down from there, and then you're looking at the various types of ads that you can run, right? These can be sponsored posts, they can be text ads, they can be video, they can be a lot of different things, right? We experimented with all of these in their various combinations against a variety of audiences. It was interesting, it was instructive. The bottom line is email plus a text ad. Just saying. The text ad, hand over fist in every use case delivered for us.
And the text ads are charged on a cost per click basis or a cost per impression?
They are, yeah. Well, I think you can actually choose to pay CPC or CPM. They do have kind of the early days of programmatic in the sense that you can give them a budget and say, give me the most that you can do based upon your algorithms. I'll tell you that I did not find that that was always the best way to go. And we'd be getting in the weeds there, but in terms of the execution of a campaign week over week for a month or more, yeah. So what I do want to make sure I say though, Bob, is that if you are a brand, if you are a marketing professional, you're working for an enterprise and you want to do something on LinkedIn, you certainly can. Can you run text ads? You certainly can. Is there something else you can do? Well, your company can run a variety of ad formats, but they do require the participation of your LinkedIn administrator and permission. And sometimes demand generators don't necessarily have that access. Yes, there are other ways you can do this. I would assume that all of them have been successful in one use case or another for LinkedIn clients. But in our scenario, which is basically outsourced, right? We're talking about email plus a text ad on LinkedIn.
Right. And the ads that you placed, were they all the same regardless of the demographics of the audiences, or did they change based on the personas of who you were reaching out to?
Oh, absolutely. In every case, it changed. Yes. It's a little different. You mentioned you've known me as an email marketer. So anybody here that's a professional digital advertiser, if you hear me say something that's a revelation to me and you know that it isn't to you, please chuckle to yourself. I understand. But yeah, the thing that we found here with the text ads is that when we execute them, they're kind of like dreaming up subject lines for emails. And the format of a text ad is essentially this. You basically have two text fields, and then you have an optional field where if you like, you can drop an image. You've got a compelling or curious logo, that's the place to drop it. And yeah, it's kind of a misnomer, right? Text ad with an image, but yes, you can. But the subject lines have to be engaging, as they have to be with email, as they have to be in an advertisement. In those two fields, effectively, we're using a subject line, right? But underneath it, we have a little more ability to expand the message. And that's where you might place what I would call a byline, which would be sort of like a subheading on an email, or maybe an opening sort of bolded statement on a landing page. Make sense?
It does. So you again, you can technically have a different subject line, different text message for the audience that's in different geographies.
You can change it iteratively. Okay, so now LinkedIn does have a process in place for approving creative, but it's pretty straightforward. I mean, yes, there are humans involved, but they're guarding against sorts of things that none of us would ever actually do, right? So, but they do make sure that you're inside of their guidelines. Yeah, and that can be changed quickly, and within a short time can be changed. But I said, digital advertisers don't chuckle if you found otherwise. In my experience, it's fundamentally different. The execution of a digital ad campaign on LinkedIn to an email campaign in some pretty key ways. So as an email marketer for many years, I can tell you that first broadcast, it's always your best broadcast. Your second broadcast, you immediately start to experience decay. Maybe you get 80% of broadcast one. And that's if you're following best practices and not slamming these people every day. After broadcast 1 and 2, there's further decay before it plateaus. But that decay is substantial. With a LinkedIn ad, what I found was, while none of them particularly overperformed beyond our tests, interestingly, you could set the ad and without changing the creative or the message, just leave it in place for about a month. Sort of set it and leave it, so to speak. And while I would tweak the pricing for various types of outcomes, it's very different from email, right? Email, you can maybe send a message a week, maybe 2 if you're brazen. And after a certain number, you are simply, it's an exercise in diminishing returns. What happened on LinkedIn was we would see 3 days of excellent performance every month, 1 week the same as the prior week. That was outstanding. So at the end of a month, what we were projecting a weekend was correct. And that's pretty important when you're planning, and particularly when you're trying to fight for some budget. Bob, you've gone silent.
Silent. There we go. So Tom had a good question. What was the call to action you used in your outreach?
Call to action. Tom, yeah, I assume you're talking about the text ads?
Mm-hmm. I think so.
Okay. So that's actually a pretty good question. So no, I'm not just saying that because it's a great way for me to pause for a moment before I give you an answer. But it is a great.
I read something like that too. That's good.
Yeah. Just a moment. I'm going to have a quick sip of coffee here. So call to actions. Our call to actions might be different than yours. Yeah, that sounds obvious, right? The reason is we're thought leadership marketers. We always have been. That's what we've done in email from the get-go. So we're not looking for demos. We're not looking for trials. We're not looking for people to click. We're not looking to give people Starbucks gift cards. It's thought leadership marketing. So to answer your question, the subject line might be something like 2021 customer experience, whatever, report results. The byline gives you an opportunity to expand that. One of the key things you want to do, obviously, is resonate with your audience. So if you aren't saying something that specifically resonates with that audience in your subject, then the byline is the place to do it. Thought leadership marketing is the way we went, and in the environment of LinkedIn, it performed very and consistently well.
And it sounds like it's going back to where it's used. So it's probably a similar call to action on the emails as you did on the
yes and no. You do have some latitude in advertising that I also discovered that you don't have in email. So in email marketing, what used to be sort of the Wild West is now more about the orchestration of a whole lot of technology and business rules, et cetera, in the name of A, getting it delivered to the inbox in the first place, and B, capturing whatever intelligence you can about them after that's happened. Now, our dear friends at Apple have made it otherwise for us. That's fine. But, at the end of the day, it wasn't about opens, it was about clicks. But as some will tell you, in fact, I just saw Chad Smith say this today, opens are hardly to be discounted. They may or may not be the earliest signs of interest, intent, demand, whatever you want to call it. But they're also the big number. They're the big data in your exercise, right? It's what we would call a target audience. Well, being able to see what that audience as a whole is doing before the clicks, that's gold. That's gold, because that can help you make, as you've asked a couple of times, Bob, you can make changes intra-campaign. Literally, you can change the subject line on an email in the same way that you can change that information relative to a LinkedIn ad. And the only difference is that has to be approved by LinkedIn Creative, but that's kind of a no-brainer.
So are you able to see patterns of what times of day the postings work best?
Well, we did. Interestingly, and this could be pandemic related because this, of course, all took place during it. So what performance might have been prior to, I can only guess. From a pandemic standpoint, I felt like we were getting exactly what we needed here, right? Because we were getting people who were engaging digitally, who had less options to engage with other things. Being able to have that audience, particularly in B2B, not necessarily captured, but certainly extra active inside of LinkedIn, helped to get us to the results we are.
Okay, that's fair. So you mentioned that for whatever reason, tech audience is maybe not as receptive as the line of business audience. HR and finance both did well. What did you find interesting about those the finance and HR case studies that you shared earlier?
I found that, and anecdotally, we found that manager level tended to absorb that content at a greater velocity and also in a greater count than any other level within an enterprise. I mentioned that because one of the things that was interesting about the IT use case that I've dubbed as not successful is that 70% of the engagement actually was at director plus. So if we had, for instance, reduced the size of our audience and just looked at Director Plus, well, we would have adjusted our expected outcomes, but our outcomes would have been better, right? So it's that sort of intelligence, and that's obviously end of campaign that can be revealed to you as you look at these tea leaves that, as an email marketer, weren't available to us before.
Right. So when you say engagement, are you suggesting that the total? I mean, I would think the total number of people who engage are, managers versus directors would be higher because there's more managers than directors. I mean, it's the whole.
If the managers are engaging.
Right.
So that's what I was saying. So you had Director Plus making up 70% of it. You had manager and those that are beneath manager 30%.
Yeah.
So we could have cut our audience by a third and gotten stellar outcomes because we were reaching a lot of people that were not going to engage.
Right.
In email, you can only learn that after a period of time of someone not engaging, right?
Right. But I think you need to know the denominator first, right? So you need to know that maybe 100,000 managers were reached out to, and maybe 1,000 of them engaged. Whereas,
so what we didn't drill into in the use case too was the relative size of the different target audiences, and that is definitely something that we're going to be talking more about. I mentioned the upcoming blog post. We also have a new ebook coming out in January that's called Omni-channel Demand Gen in Action. And it's going to take these 4 use cases, and hopefully we'll have what I call a successful IT use case by that time, and really get into it. And one of those metrics is going to be, so what size audiences were you working with? One of the calls I expected today was, what was the size of that ABN audience that you were working with, right?
Right. So I imagine that going back to Tom's question, as far as the call to action. So like you said, it depends on what you're going after. If you want people to get engaged, then I think more than likely managers and below are more engaged than directors and so forth.
Yes, that's probably true.
And for email too, right? Same concept.
Yes, but the reason that I went on the whole thought leadership marketing rant was, I would imagine these can be successful in other ways, whether you're promoting a free demo or a trial period or whatever. I don't know. And I wish I could share the 4 IT brands that we did these for, but unfortunately I'm not able to. But the reason I want to is just to say, these are the brands, guys, and we didn't get the outcomes we were looking for, not relative to the other audiences.
Yeah. Makes sense. So the engagement, I guess, is it pretty consistent that the people that engaged well in email, it's a similar mix, or did you find that the mix is different for LinkedIn versus then?
Well, that's actually a more important question than maybe you think, Bob, or you were asking this to me sideways. But the thing we have to look at here is audience size and the different types of engagement that we can get from it, right? So refresh my memory on that one, Bob. Let me make sure I address that.
So what I was asking is, is the mix pretty similar as far as the ability to engage people on email versus LinkedIn, for instance?
Yeah, there's actually 3 different answers to that. So that's why I got hung up for just a moment. I'm going to say yes and no. And the reason I say that is because the only time you can categorically know yes is if someone engages in both channels, right? And two-touch are the big thing these days, and content syndication. Let me tell you a dirty secret here that I've told every player in this space. Double touch is great for qualification, categorically. Can you do it at scale? Good luck. The chances of someone engaging twice with the same campaign, regardless of channel, are usually about 20% within a typical flight range of 3 or 4 weeks. If you get somebody that engaged with both, it's either gold or it's pyrite. And what I mean by that is, at the end of the day, we don't know if they have budget and they're ready to buy, or they're just curious. or if their cat, happened to step on their keyboard in the right way.
Right. So they could be really lonely or
Who can speculate?
yeah. So it makes sense to me. So you'd mentioned before, so just to get clarification of terminology. So demand gen versus lead gen.
Yeah,
So-
the question of the ages, he says with a certain amount of hubris. Lead gen at the end of the day, in my estimation, is more quote unquote qualified than demand, simply because it is a lead. So if you've gone to the trouble of defining what a lead is, and you brought that definition into your marketing automation so that when you're ingesting from various channels this information, you are going to score them, right, based on how they've engaged or how often, or maybe some formula that's more complicated by that. And ultimately they're a lead, they're scored. What's the difference? Lead goes to an SDR. What's the job now? Not brand awareness, baby. It's not about just putting a contact in marketing automation. It's about closing the deal. Demand gen is, in my view, in a spot between lead generation and intelligent brand awareness raising. Demand gen, in my view, starts at the top of the funnel, at the very top of the funnel. How can you drive that demand? Well, there's a lot of different ways. We've all done it over the years and do it today. My argument has always been that demand begins before then. And I think, frankly, Forrester's Serious Decisions' latest demand waterfall pretty much says that. There's this whole area called target demand that exists before there's any funnel in the picture. So if you can identify who these folks are, if you can engage them before the competition, well, I can talk about all the more nebulous outcomes of competitive advantage and first mover advantage, but at the end of the day, it's about what can we accomplish. And what we saw hand over hand, time over time, with the use cases that we deemed to be successful, was a minimum 50% lift over what was planned in email in terms of demand gen outcomes. Now, in this particular case, we're talking form completions. But I can also tell you that you can generate clicks 3x plus. And that's a whole nother creature, right? Because clicks inside of LinkedIn typically are not identifiable. Clicks in email marketing absolutely are. Absolutely are. Even if you're using an Apple device. That is one of the two differences.
What do you mean by an Apple device or not?
Well, with all of the recent, to use a term for my generation, hullabaloo, with Apple's privacy, I guess I'm going to call it an application that is inside their new iOS and coming out on new devices. And in effect, you can elect to not only not have cookies captured, but you can also elect to not have pixels captured. And that's where so many people, particularly in the advertising space, are going, oh Lord, I don't know what my open rate is anymore. Well, open rate was always kind of a vanity metric anyway. I mean, it does mean something, but you could benchmark that and go from there. What are we looking for, really? I mean, opens intelligence, impressions intelligence, that's great stuff. But engagement doesn't really start there, not in a measurable sense, but it does start at the click, short of the form.
So you consider an open to be a level of engagement, a click to be more of an engagement?
I see it as the earliest evidence of potential demand. That's what I call it.
And you
it's
see
a
it
source
as
of intelligence. I'm sorry?
You see it as a positive that they showed some interest in clicking that or opening or whatever. The fact they didn't do any further, you're not taking that as a negative per se.
Let me put it this way. Anyone who clicks or fills out a form or picks up a phone or goes to the company's website and asks me to contact, whatever, those are obviously very measurable outcomes, right? A click is a little bit different. A click they opened, they didn't choose to fill out a form. If a form was presented, they consumed the content. What do you know about that? Well, you may know how long they were on a page and all that sort of thing, but what do you know about before they arrived there? Obviously, a click has to precede it, and everything starts with an open. It's that simple. A click and a form completion cannot exist without the open that preceded them. So they're all subsets of that. So yes, I put my arms around all that demand. I'm going to nurture that as much as I possibly can.
So you're going to assume they've got some interest, whether they went all the way or not. They maybe need a nudge.
Yeah,
to
right,
go further.
right. Yeah, as opposed to, they were waiting to board the plane and Facebook stopped working. I can't know that. The only thing that we can know is if we continue to use our content and project our expertise to these folks, that we can convert that. So the difference is really, there is no difference, right? We're still looking for leads ultimately. What I'm saying is we've never been smart enough at the top of the funnel. Intent data, for better or for worse, has been the best attempt thus far to do that. But that, by definition, tells you only about the intent that occurred at a domain level. But what we're talking about here is intent that may be shown to us at a contact level.
Okay, and that's another definition I think we need to have. So what means intent?
Well, I think intent data today is mainly an offering of a number of technology companies who have formed consortiums or partnerships or whatever, so that they can take the engagement activity across billions of actions, right? And these can be transactional, they can be on websites, it can be a lot of different things. And effectively, what it will show you, let's say you provided them a list of 100 companies, and they'll come back and they'll tell you what was the engagement with these 100 companies. You do obviously have to run a campaign to find out how they'll engage, but these are the ones that appear in the ether to be engaging with your brand. From here, you can take that and, you can, if you've got a substantial database, you can build your own target group and begin a campaign, or more typically, you'll take that information, go into content syndication, particularly if you're a technology marketer, and say, okay, here is my TAL, and I want only contacts that are from these domains. Why? Because as far as I can tell, these are the folks that are looking at us, but they don't know any more than I do why they're looking at you unless they engage further.
That makes sense.
Great.
All right. So Tom had another good question. What's the time frame for the omni-channel approach that you described?
Yeah. So, remember, I said at the outset, not a scientist. So use of the word experiment may or may not apply. We tried, as I said, endless combinations of campaign types and ad types, as well as a variety of different audiences. But the time frame for all was effectively 30 days or less. And what I mean by that, Tom, is our goal was 30 days, but if we reached goal or we reached budget for that, short of having reached goal, the campaign would pause. If you drill into the use cases, you'll see that in some cases, they only ran for 16 days, others, they ran 30. What I want to know, Tom, is what happens if I run it for a quarter? What are learnings there? Like, to the point of being able to change things like, subject lines, headlines, bylines, right? Our approach this past time was, set it up and let it go for a month. Yes, we absolutely tweaked for price most days. But what happens beyond that? Do if you're going to run an ad 3 months, do you need to change the image? Do you need to change the byline? Do you need to change the subject line? I really don't know yet. Let's find out.
Right. So that brings up another question. I think, so during that 30-day period or whatever, how many times does someone get hit? How many of those impressions are the same people? So
those are all, okay, yeah. So those are unique impressions.
Right.
And Bob, you asked me a question earlier. I guess I'll answer it here for everyone. So you noted that on some of the use case information that I had provided to you, that our goal for any of the campaigns from an impressions intelligence standpoint was to get at least 500,000 impressions. That was an outcome of our experiments. So in a 30-day period or less, we were able to get in excess of 500,000 impressions for all of these use cases. But the truth is, that was sort of our floor. every one of the campaigns, including IT, I think, actually exceeded that floor.
Yeah. Okay. So again, I don't know if I answered the question right. So I assume that you're hitting the same people multiple times, the impressions, or you, not you, but LinkedIn is. So I may have gotten 5 impressions of your ad over the 30 days. Maybe.
Well, when you say hit, I'm thinking more in sort of the email vernacular.
Exposure.
From digital ads, really, you're talking inbound. That's what's happening here.
Right.
Yes, it is being targeted and delivered to them based upon their match to our persona, but it's not really being pushed to an inbox. It's being put on a screen that they see. Right.
Okay. And then Tom asked another question, and I think it gets back to the call to action, really. So were you able to track the engagements into the bottom funnel sales pipelines, engage its dollar impact?
Yeah, so we are actually engaged with several companies about arriving at that. As I said, this experiment took place during the pandemic. We conducted this experiments, over a period of time, and now there's been a certain amount of time that's transpired since then. But it's only been maybe a few months since the late campaigns. So I think this was the time, Tom, to, from an appropriate standpoint, to reach out to those clients and say, okay, tell us, how did they convert? Because the information that we provide does tell you what was the origination, the lead origin, right? So you could even see how your LinkedIn generated outcomes matched your email generated outcomes.
Right. If the clients share it, and I think that's a trick. I think that's pretty rare, where the client gets feedback of which leads ended up being opportunities and sales and so forth.
What I will tell you is most of our clients these days, do like a quarterly look back. Okay. Most of our clients are over 10 years old, except for the new ones we win, obviously. So I would say that we usually meet that standard. But a lot of email campaigns these days too do run for a quarter. The days of just 30-day flights are kind of long gone. A lot of them are 90 days, sometimes longer. So it totally makes sense to test, right, the LinkedIn ads for a quarter long. But let me put it this way. I'd rather do that when there's a paying customer, right, as opposed to experimentation. Because at this point, we don't actually know what happens after the first right. 30 days.
Right. So what's some of the intelligence that you gathered from the LinkedIn that helped you with the email and vice versa?
Well, that's a two-sided question. So one of the answers is, what did we learn overall, and how did that inform our overall email efforts, right, as a company? And the other was, what happened to intra-campaign, right, that was actually valuable to us inside of that campaign.
Right. I'm getting back to your point that there's synergies that help each campaign out, and there's intelligence that insightful views of performance. I think you mentioned. So how is that actionable? What did you do with that to make each of the campaigns successful?
Okay, that's a broader question than I think you think it is, Bob. But it does bring me back. You asked me where I wanted to go with this before we wrapped up, and I said at the start, is this omni-channel marketing? Yeah, but it's really omni-channel demand gen. And that, one of the key things about that is that folks are paying for it. They're working from a budget that's for demand gen. They don't want to pay for brand awareness unless that brand awareness can be monetized in a way that makes sense to them. So what we did here is we modeled our outcomes as demand gen outcomes. CPL, cost per lead, for an ad originating from LinkedIn is the same as one that is generated via email. Impressions are sort of part of the package, right? So I don't know, did I answer that question sufficiently, or swing at it?
So one of the things you mentioned, the difference between omni-channel and multi-channel is the synergies and the shared intelligence and the shared strategy and so forth. So I'm just trying to get a picture, because still in my head, I'm seeing you're doing two different campaigns at the same time, email and.
We are. That's exactly what we're doing, which goes right back to me saying this ain't brain surgery.
Yeah.
But, you know, we have what we call the 5 pillars of successful omni-channel demand gen. And if you haven't seen that in a blog post, you will soon enough. But, you know, we've talked about several of those already today. And I think, you know, for for an omni-channel campaign to be successful, while it may have various hallmarks of a siloed multi-channel campaign, it's the overlay of strategy. I should say it's the precedence of strategy, actions governed by that strategy that are consistent with each other, reinforcing of each other. They've obviously got to be pointed at the same audience. So if you go on LinkedIn and you create a different audience than the one you sent an email to, it's going to be interesting outcomes. I should mention here, by the way, that we've only seen a small overlap between the two, because, you know, the singularly highest level of engagement that I would expect from an omni-channel campaign in our use cases, they engage in both via email and with the ad. But remember, I said that only happens 20% of the time in a typical campaign. So, you know, we can certainly see those types of outcomes, and those are going to be most demonstrable of the overall outcome. But what I will say this, it's also about the spend. So spend some in email, spend some in LinkedIn, do it disjointed, you will get outcomes. Okay. What will those outcomes look like if you take the time to plan and run them in concert and have a means to unify that information, have a plan to unify that information? Well, you're going to see not only a lift in the overall campaign that exceeds any increase in cost for adding the channel, and you're going to see an overall lift in both channels. That's what we saw time and again. And that was the thing that just really floored me. And that's when that light bulb went off and I said, omni-channel looks like part of where our future is.
Good. Well, and I appreciate your sharing, and I appreciate the, you know, your philosophy, which is the same as mine, that, you know, we can all, you know, the world's big enough, we can all succeed. It's nice to share with each other, and we all get to learn. To that end, I think I'd like to put together a panel discussion with you and some others.
Sounds great.
Different disciplines and different focuses, and see how we can learn from each other. I think that's you know, I appreciate it.
I think that would be great. And, you know, you guys won't have to listen to me talk as much because there'll be other people.
We'll mix it up a little bit. What else? So what should we be looking for? You'll be, you've got some blogs out there. If anybody's interested, they can find them on LinkedIn. You can
you know, Little Hip B2B is pretty much of a content machine. As I said, the Finance One audience, and the thing to look for there, as I said, is this was an ABM audience, unlike the other 3 use cases. We're going to put that in blog form out November 16th. Now, if you attended this event, and I didn't say registered, if you attended this event, Bob's going to be kind enough to send you a version of that. It's not the final one, and my creative team would be very unhappy with me, but it's clean enough for you to see now what we're going to put out next week. And then December 14th is the human resources one. That should be very interesting. The thing I'm excited about beyond that, though, Bob, as I mentioned earlier, was our next ebook. The first ebook, Omni-channel Demand Gen, actually came out about a month ago, I'd say. This one will come out in January. And when I say in action, we're taking a medium, which in my estimation is largely fluff, concepts, blah, blah. And we're going to take these use cases, we're going to drill into them. We're going to answer some of the questions that were posed today, and probably quite a few others that weren't.
Very good. Excellent. I appreciate it. Any other final words of wisdom?
Sure. One more. Yeah, absolutely. Self-promoting too. So in February, Ascend 2, one of our good partners, and you know, another research-based company in our ecosystem that's worked for a number of folks probably on this call. They are going to be publishing original research on omni-channel. demand gen. So we're real excited about that. It's nothing like research-based information, to really shore up your position. Our use cases are great, but they're not third party. And so, yeah, keep your eye out for that.
Excellent. Bret, it's a pleasure. Thank you for sharing.
Same here, Bob. Hopefully we can see each other sooner than later. And I promise to wear one of my crazier shirts when I do.
I look forward to it.
All
Thank you,
right.
Bret.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.